Hello History 187 students. I wanted to make a little video for you because you're about to read some testimony about the type of knot that was used to bind Maria Cornell's neck to the fence post in the haystack yard. This testimony is a little difficult to follow for a couple of reasons, one of which is that some of it is somewhat inconsistent, but the other of which is that it references knots we may or may not be familiar with from our sort of life experiences. And so I wanted to tie a couple of these knots for you just so you can see what the testimony is talking about and get a better sense of why these knots were relevant to the question of whether Maria Cornell had been murdered or committed suicide. So the first knot referenced is going to be a slip knot, and this is probably a knot that many of you have tied in the past. In order to tie a slip knot, you really don't have to tie it around anything. You just sort of push one end of a cord through. And when you tie a slip knot, you can basically just pull one end of that knot, just like I'm doing here, and the knot will tighten. And so you can imagine if this was around someone's neck and they slumped forward, the weight of their body might be enough to tighten that knot. Although you will also note that even though this knot is getting tighter, there is a little gap between the knot and my finger that will exist unless I push this knot down. If I push it down, that gap closes. But the cord was still plenty tight even with that gap, so pressure on one end of a slip knot will tighten that knot. A slip knot, though, is not what a lot of the witnesses described seeing around Maria Cornell's neck. What they described was something called a clove hitch knot. A clove hitch knot is a knot that's designed, as its name would imply, to hitch one object to another. And it's commonly used in sort of maritime applications or in farming. And I'm just going to show you what this knot actually looks like. So to make a clove hitch knot, basically what you do is you make a loop, you make a second loop, and then you pass the free end or your working end of the rope under that second loop. Now, you will note I just tied this knot around an object, meaning around my finger, because that's how it's intended to be tied. It's really meant to be tied around something. You can't tie it in midair and then just slip it over. That's significant when you think about the fact that this would have needed to be tied around Maria Cornell's neck and around the fence post. You saw what I just did. I will leave it to you to judge whether somebody might be able to do that around their own neck or whether it makes sense for them to do that around their own neck. But another interesting thing that's referred to in the testimony is the fact that clove hitch knots don't tighten like slip knots do. If I just pull one end of this knot, you'll see the knot's not really tightening, it's actually slipping. Same thing if I pull this end, the knot just slides. In order to get a clove hitch to tighten, you need to put pressure on both ends. If I put pressure on both ends simultaneously, you can see that this knot is starting to bite into my finger. If I just do one end though, it's not so effectual. Why does this matter? Well, you can imagine that if Sarah Maria Cornell had committed suicide, she would not only have to tie this knot around her own neck without being able to see it, but she would also have to grasp both ends. And I'm going to put my finger like her head would have been. They said the knot was around by her right ear, so she would have had to kind of reach behind her to pull this end and in front of her to pull this end, and that's how that knot would have gotten tight. So that's just to help you understand the testimony. I will leave it to you to weigh whether you think somebody could have done this to themselves and used this particular type of knot to end their lives.